questions. Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of an associated, so in the last week I had a discussion with a woman who says she refuses to do any kind of water conservation as long as the farmers in western Kansas are draining the aquifer to raise corn to feed the animals and do ethanol.
Right.
How can I argue with that?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a moral argument there that's, somebody else is doing something wrong, so you're going to do something wrong too. I think that the water sources are actually different sources. You're not drinking aquifer water here. You're drinking Kansas River water. So I think they're going to have their own problems in western Kansas, and I think they're already starting to have their own problems with the lack of availability of water. They're treating the aquifer very cavalierly. And they're growing stuff that should not be grown in a semi-arid environment like corn. And they're going to either address it or they're not going to have water. But we still have to survive. Yeah.
Getting back to the way that you opened and developed really the theological topics, you pointed out a number of Christian denominations that emphasize stewardship over dominance, and some of the people in the audience mentioned that there are other Christian beliefs, such as the apocalypse, that would make that irrelevant or undesirable. But within Judaism, is there a similar strain of thought or of belief that you have to contend with in order to sell the idea that you're advancing here?
Well, there isn't the end times theology in Judaism that there is in some strains of Christianity. But remember at the beginning when I was saying that salvation is not just for not for personal purposes, but it's for doing good works in the world. That tension exists in Judaism too, which is that, is mitzvah, is ritual practice just so, you get yourself in good with God, or is it so that you can perfect yourself, prepare yourself for doing good works in the world, for doing tikkun olam? So I think that strain exists. There's a lot of people who are sort of, there's a significant percentage of Jews who are internally focused and are more about the ritual practice than they are about worrying about everything else in the world. So that's where the strain is. There isn't really the kind of end times, the world is going to end stuff. Judaism tends to be pretty disworldly in its focus. But there is that kind of, as long as I'm eating kosher and keeping Shabbos, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. That's where that tension comes in. Yeah.
It seems to me that the legislative types, maybe others too, are really used to hearing the debates, the science debates, and all the gnashing of teeth there. And it seems to me that the faith community has if it's going to have any leverage at all, because if you just repeat the science, you're part of that whole thing.
Right.
The thing that would set the faith community apart would be making these incredibly powerful moral arguments.
Right.
When you're giving testimony, for example, at the legislature, and you set aside the science for a moment and come as a theologian or some member of a faith community, how do you personally frame the moral argument?
Well, I mean, similar to what I did now. So last week we had this climate denial. There's two different answers to your question. One is when we're talking about climate specifically, and the other one is when we're talking about other policies. Okay? So when we're talking about the RPS or net metering, we're basically talking about, we're basically focusing on the actual this-worldly benefits. So, when we're talking about wind, we're talking about $6 billion of investment in 13,000 jobs, right? And payments and payments in lieu of taxes in areas that helps them keep their roads cleared or their schools open. All right? So that's a big piece of it, is that we're not necessarily saying do wind because of climate change. We're saying do wind because it's good economically. And we think that God wants us to care for creation. I mean, we always say something in there about that. We are also, so that's when we're talking about policies, everybody knows that I'm interested in climate change. I mean, that's my thing, but I don't talk about it all the time on every issue. I try to say this is a good policy for this and this reason. And underlying that is the fact that we want to move away from dirty energy and towards clean energy.
But you could do that if you were not a member of a faith community, if there
Right.
was,
Right. So last week when we were talking about climate change, and a lot of times I'm not the one who does the testifying, because we are in a coalition, us and the Sierra Club, Climate and Energy Project, KNRC, are in a coalition called Kansas for Clean Energy, and we develop testimony together, and then so we each say faith and economics and environment, and we hit those points. But last week when we were doing the climate change one, we had a scientist who said, this bill is wrong for this and this reason. And then I come up and I go, I'm not a scientist, but I know that we're supposed to care for creation. I have to believe what 97% of scientists say, because that's the kind of person I am. I don't think they're trying to fool us. God wants us to care for creation. I mean, it's always kind of from that point of view. We have creation care as our foundation. Today when I went, we were talking about solar energy on churches was something I was working on today. Churches want to be able to use cleaner energy because they perceive it to be part of their mission to care for God's creation. That kind of thing. So that's always in there somewhere. Sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, depending on what the issues are. But certainly stewardship, efficiency, Westar not making money off wasting energy, which they do. Right, that's that kind of stuff.
I think I was looking for something like, if you all people don't pay attention, you're going to hell.
Yeah, that's not my theology. I did tell somebody that I thought he was bearing false witness once. I did tell somebody that I thought he was bearing false witness once, which is about as strong as I ever get. Even John had to leave, but he's a congregant of mine, and I don't tell anybody they're going to hell. Yeah.
I preached years ago in the second church I had. I came up with a chart. Actionaries, reactionaries, and inactionaries. And the more I think about it, I think the real danger is in the inactionary group.
Right.
Because I think the underlying ism that's at work is fatalism.
Right.
It's all been decided, we can't do a dadgum thing about it, so why care? And that just has worn me down.
So when I go to talk to a church, like even a more conservative church, or just any church anywhere, like I went to Hayes, right?
But do conservative church, let me hear that.
So what I'm not trying to convince. Well, I have actually a different presentation for conservative churches. I talk a little bit more about redemption and the earth is suffering. There's a text in Isaiah that I used. The earth is crying under its burdens, and then turning back to Jesus, turning back to the godly way, right? It's kind of hard for me to witness about Jesus. So if people disagree with me, they go, "Oh, you let a Jew on the pulpit." That's where they go to. That's where they go to. Oh, what kind of pastor are you? You let a Jew on the pulpit. That's when they disagree with me politically. So I'm not there to try to convince the denier, right? I'm there to give succor to the people who believe in what I'm saying, right? Because there's a real benefit to preaching to the choir when the choir doesn't get preached to very much. Right? So you're the only person in Hayes who cares about climate change. It's nice to have somebody come and say, there's such a thing as climate change, right? It makes you feel connected. Then there's probably 5 deniers, and there's probably 15 people who agree with me, and then there's 50 other people, right? So if 10 of those people will hear, I'm the only person who's ever going to say to their face, climate change is real. I mean, they might hear it, whatever, but it's Al Gore, whatever. It's not like a real person. Right? And I hear it from Rush in the combine every day that it's not true. Right? So I come and say it's true. So I hope that 10 people will be part of the actionaries, and then 15 people will open their question, will open question. Right? I know that there's 25 people or whatever that are going to say, you should never have brought him in here, he's a liberal Jew, whatever. But I know that there's also 25 people who are in need of good information and are in need of the moral framing of this. And that's what I'm there to provide. I'm not there, I don't need the majority, I need an activist minority.
Wow.
And in a place like Kansas, just from the political point of view, it's 10 people, 15 people writing to a legislator, that means something in a place like Kansas about one issue. No, there are, 15 people from Hayes want the RPS. that means something. Even though she's getting money, $5,000 from the Koch brothers or whatever, that it still means something that there's enough people that are activated to reach out about that issue. And that's what I'm trying to do. Just to get them to, then 15 calls from home, they're more likely to listen to me or to my allies when I make a good argument about the benefits of it economically. That's the way I feel about it. That's kind of my motivational. Yeah.
Dennis had mentioned earlier the natural cycles of the Earth and asking about their relationship to climate change. And unfortunately, the science on that is doubly scary because the natural cycle right now
Should be
is
down.
toward cooling.
Right.
And we've managed to make it hotter even during this cooling cycle.
Right.
Which means when that cycle starts turning back up toward warming again, it could just take off.
Right. Right. Yeah.
One of the messages you bring for me is making the distinction between the factual and the conjecture. And it has seemed to me that looking back over my own experience, I haven't done a very good job in my conversation or even in my own thinking of making that distinction very clear. And somebody made reference to this earlier, that the news, many of the news reporters, some of the ones who we think are the most balanced, bring both of those in equal proportion.
Right.
And leaves us still hanging, even though we're responsive to the factual, it leaves us hanging with the confusion of the conjecture.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Clean energy works. Efficiency works. All right? There's a woman in Winfield, north of Winfield, her name is Ann. She testified for us on the net metering bill. She did efficiency and put solar panels on her house, and she's used 58% less energy than she did before. 58% less energy.
Jeez.
So all throughout the state, so if we want to get away from dirty energy, we want to save energy, we want to move towards renewables, all throughout the state we have to weatherize buildings and build capacity. Right? These are jobs that cannot be outsourced. This is 50 years of a transition that's American ingenuity, right? Research, development, installation, weatherizing, all this stuff in areas of Kansas where kids can't wait to get out of it, right? Now you're giving them a reason to stay. These are, leaving aside climate change. The objective criteria of business and economy speaks to this is something that we can do that will have a benefit for us. And oh, by the way, we're going to save the planet too. So that's where I come from on that. That's why we sort of frame it that way. God wants us to care for the earth. That means using less dirty energy and using more clean energy. Bobby Kennedy Jr. says energy from hell or energy from heaven. Right? Right? So that's really where it comes from. And when you look at it that way, and it kind of gets out of the politics of climate change, or the fake politics of climate, whatever it is, then people see that. Why do you think 75% of Kansas want the RPS to be raised? Why? After 2 years or 5 years or 5 years of propaganda against it, why? Because they see that it's good. They see that it works. And that's what we have to open up. It's more like just, opening the eyes. Because when you look at things objectively, that clean energy does work.
Now, do we know how much would be saved by ECM if this building had solar panels?
Well, ECM actually has done a good deal of efficiency work on this building. I think those windows are all new.
Right.
I think the furnaces are new.
Yes.
I don't know about, the problem with solar is that right now you can't, nonprofits are not eligible for the tax credit, the federal tax credit. That's actually the bill I was working on this morning. If you as a homeowner can put solar on your house and take a 30% tax credit. The bank could lend you 100% of the money, they would take the 30% tax credit, and that would be their profit margin, then you'd just be making payments to the bank. Churches can't do that because of a vagary of the law. So we're trying to close that loophole so that the churches can take advantage of the 30% discount. To do solar on this building, you'd have to come up with 30% down, which is not impossible to do, but it would be an investment, obviously.
So where's that bill going?
Where's that bill going? Well, I thought we did a good job. I don't think it's gonna get through this year, but I had a conversation with the KCP&L lobbyist, and he said that we could work on, they opposed it for a reason that I kind of don't want to go into. But it wasn't a good reason, but they opposed it and they're not going to not oppose it. But I said, can we fix this somehow? And he said he would sit down with me and we'd try to fix it. So I'm happy, you know, that was actually a happy thing to hear. So I don't know if it's going to be this year, but it's very good possible that we could do it next year. All right, I'm almost out of time, so yeah.
I don't know whether I can say this right, but it just occurred to me that the most powerful moral argument that I'm experiencing today is the symbolism that you bring, that you are a man of faith talking about this subject matter, and it's almost more symbolic than it is factual or argumentative. I'm just deeply struck by how that's impacted me.
Thank you. I want to say that it's important that, you know, things are very bad.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if you've seen Chasing Ice, but those glaciers are not coming back. Even if we stop burning fossil fuels today, those glaciers are basically gone. So the world is different. The world will be different. And it's very easy to kind of go, oh, you know, but it's the disempowerment that you were talking about. It's all the good-hearted people checking out. That's the problem. But the way to address the issue actually makes our life better. Because lower use of coal leads to less asthma and less developmental disabilities. It leads to less pollution. It leads to more water resources. It leads to an economy that's more based on cooperation rather than confrontation. It's based on a world working in a predictable way. It's based on being able to buy healthy food as easily as we can buy a fast food hamburger. It's based on not having to get into your car every time you want to go someplace. I mean, these are all things that actually will qualitatively make our life better. So my major goal is to show you hope that concerted effort can lead to positive results that will make the world a better place. Even in a lesser world, our life can be better. That's a very hard needle to thread, but I think that's really what we need to do.
This is a good place to conclude, and I want to thank you, and I think all of us want to thank you for giving such articulate hope on this issue, which we all need to become actionaries, whether we resigned from the race earlier. Thank you for being here.
If you want to come to the Capitol on Tuesday, we're having Wind Works for Kansas Day at 10:30 at the Capitol. Go on my website and there'll be something about it probably later today. We're trying to bring some people in to talk about wind as a benefit to Kansas. So thank you very much for coming, and I'll hope to see you again sometime.
I just wanted to say that Ken Lastman took very good care of us Monday night at the center. Good.